I was driving back from picking up Madison after school, the radio humming softly in the background, as she sat quietly in the backseat. Usually, she'd be telling me all about her day by now, what new games they played during recess, what snacks her friends had brought, but today, the silence was unsettling. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Her little face was furrowed with something I couldn't quite place. "Daddy?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should say what was on her mind. "Yeah, sweetheart?" I tried to keep my tone light, even though a knot was forming in my stomach. "I saw Mommy today, with Mr. Matt." Her words came out slowly, carefully. Matt was our neighbor and lived just a couple of houses down. He was always around, fixing something in his yard, cracking jokes at the neighborhood barbecues. Just a regular guy, I thought. I didn't think much of it at first. "Oh, were they at school for something?" I asked, hoping the conversation would end there. But Madison's brow furrowed deeper, and then she whispered the words that shattered the last bit of normalcy I'd been holding onto. "They were kissing." The car felt suddenly too small, the air too thick to breathe. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, but I knew I had to stay calm, for her sake. "Kissing?" I managed to choke out the word, praying she misunderstood. "Like, on the cheek?" She shook her head, her eyes wide and innocent. "No, Daddy. Like how you kiss Mommy." My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, to pull over and demand answers. But how could I? How could I let her see the storm that was brewing inside me? I swallowed hard and forced a smile onto my face, though it felt like my whole world was crumbling. "Thanks for telling me, Maddie. It's probably just a misunderstanding, okay?" She nodded, but I could tell from the way she kept glancing at me that she didn't believe my weak assurances. Hell, I didn't believe them myself. The rest of the drive was a blur. My thoughts were running wild, spinning scenarios in my head that I didn't want to believe. By the time we got home, my mind was in overdrive. Rachel wasn't there, of course. She was working late like she had been a lot lately. At least, that's what she told me. I went through the motions that evening, making dinner, helping Maddie with her homework, and putting her to bed, but I felt like a robot, disconnected from my own life. The words kept replaying in my head, kissing Mr. Matt. I wanted to believe it was just a mistake, that Madison had seen something innocent and misinterpreted it. But deep down, I knew better. There had been too many late nights, too many sudden changes in Rachel's mood, too many glances exchanged between her and Matt that I'd brushed off. Once Madison was asleep, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the blank TV screen. My hands were trembling, and I could feel my pulse thudding in my temples. Rage was building, an anger I hadn't felt in years. But along with it came fear. Fear of what this would mean for our family, for Maddie, for me. I couldn't just let this slide. Not when my own daughter had seen it. Not when my wife had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found Tom's number. Tom, an old friend from college, works as a private investigator now. We hadn't spoken in a while, but if there was anyone who could get to the bottom of this, it was him. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before I finally pressed call. Single quote dot. "Kev, man, it's been a while," Tom answered on the third ring, his voice casual, friendly. He had no idea the storm he was about to step into. "I need your help, Tom. I need to know if Rachel's cheating on me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Tom's voice dropped an octave, serious. "I'll take care of it. You're sure you want to know?" I clenched my jaw, trying to steady my voice. I don't have a choice anymore. As I hung up, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. The anger was still there, burning just beneath the surface, but now it had a direction, a purpose. I was going to find out the truth, and when I did, Rachel and Matt wouldn't know what hit them. The following week was torture. Every minute Rachel was home, I watched her carefully, analyzing every word, every movement. She didn't know what I knew. That was the one thing keeping me sane. She would smile, laugh, act like everything was normal. But I could see it now, the slight tension in her face, the way she hesitated when I asked about her day. She was lying, and I needed proof. Tom worked fast. 3 days after I called him, I got a text that shook me. "Got something. Let's meet tomorrow." I told Rachel I had a meeting after work and wouldn't be home until late. She barely reacted, just nodded and said, "Okay, have a good one." A month ago, that wouldn't have bothered me, but now it was like she didn't even care if I was there or not. That hurt more than I'd expected. The next day, I met Tom at a coffee shop across town. It was one of those places where no one asks questions. We sat in a booth at the back, Tom sliding a thick envelope across the table before taking a sip of his coffee. He looked at me, eyes serious. "It's not good, Kev." I stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of what it represented. Inside were answers I wasn't sure I was ready for. "Show me." Tom pulled out a series of photos and laid them in front of me. The first one was innocuous enough, Rachel and Matt standing by his car, talking. But then the next one showed them in his car, her hand resting on his arm. Their heads turned toward each other in a way that was unmistakable. The third photo was the one that crushed me, Rachel leaning in, kissing him. The kind of kiss that wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate, passionate. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My heart pounded as I stared at the evidence, the cold, hard proof of what I'd suspected. Tom didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The pictures said it all. "And that's not all," Tom said quietly, pulling out another set of photos. "They've been meeting up in the afternoons. Hotels mostly. And last night, while you were home with Madison." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The photo he slid across the table next showed Rachel walking into a hotel with Matt, hand in hand. I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of anger rise up. It wasn't just that she had lied to me. She had brought this into our home, into our family. While I was here, raising our daughter, being the husband and father I thought I was supposed to be. She was out sneaking around with our neighbor. "What do you want to do?" Tom asked after a long silence. I didn't answer right away. My first instinct was to confront her, to scream and demand answers, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would just make me look desperate, and I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. No, if she thought she could play me for a fool, she was wrong. "I need more than this," I finally said. "I need something that's going to ruin them. Publicly." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" I nodded. "I'm not just ending my marriage, Tom. I'm ending her whole life if she knows it." He took a deep breath, clearly sensing the gravity of what I was asking. "All right, I'll keep digging. There's gotta be more. But Kev, be careful with this. Revenge can blow up in your face." His words barely registered. My mind was spinning with possibilities. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about making Rachel pay, making her feel the same humiliation and betrayal I was feeling. And Matt, he wasn't going to get off easy either. He thought he could waltz into my life and steal my wife? He was going to wish he'd never laid eyes on her. Over the next week, Tom kept me updated. Every day, there was something new, more photos, text messages between Rachel and Matt, receipts from hotels and restaurants. It was like they didn't even care if they got caught. Like I wasn't even a factor in their lives anymore. The worst part was pretending everything was normal at home. Rachel still acted like nothing was wrong, oblivious to the fact that I was gathering ammunition to destroy her. There were moments when I wanted to scream at her, throw the photos in her face, and demand answers, but I held back. I knew that if I played this right, I'd have the last word. I started planning my move carefully. I knew the PTA meeting was coming up soon, and that was where I'd make my stand. Rachel and I had always been involved in the school, and I knew how much her reputation meant to her. She loved being the perfect mom, the one everyone looked up to. Well, that was about to change. I contacted the PTA president and asked to speak at the meeting. "Just a few words about family and community," I said. She was thrilled to have me on the agenda, no idea what was really coming. As the day of the meeting approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, but now it had direction and purpose. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew it was going to hit Rachel and Matt harder than they ever expected. They had made their choices. Now it was time for the consequences. The morning of the PTA meeting, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. It was the kind of feeling you get right before something big happens, like the quiet before a storm. Rachel was already out the door by the time I got up, leaving just a note saying she had errands to run before the meeting. If only she knew what I had planned. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, rehearsing my speech in my head. This was going to be the most public form of revenge I could pull off. There wouldn't be any screaming, no dramatic confrontations. Just the cold, hard truth. I was going to strip away her mask of perfection in front of all the people she cared about most, the other parents, the school administrators, the people who looked up to her as the ideal mom. By the time Madison came downstairs, I composed myself. She had no idea what was coming, and I needed to keep it that way. For her, the world still needed to feel stable, even if mine was falling apart. "Daddy, are you coming to the meeting tonight?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mommy said you're speaking." I forced a smile, swallowing the bitter truth that was stuck in my throat. "I am, sweetie. It's going to be important." She grinned, completely unaware of the weight of my words. I bent down and kissed the top of her head, wondering how things had gone so wrong. But today wasn't about pity or regret. Today was about action. The rest of the day dragged on like a slow, ticking clock. I went through the motions at work, keeping my mind off the meeting as much as I could, but by the afternoon, the nerves started to set in. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment where everything would change. There was no turning back now. When I arrived at the school that evening, the gymnasium was already packed with parents, teachers, and staff. Rachel was there too, mingling with the other moms, looking polished as ever. She wore a bright smile, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Standing next to her, Matt casually talked to a few of the dads, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. I clenched my fists, feeling that familiar surge of anger. But I forced myself to remain calm. Tonight wasn't about rage, it was about control. As I made my way toward the front of the room, I nodded to the PTA president. "Ready when you are," I said. She smiled warmly. "We're so glad to have you speak tonight, Kevin. I'm sure the parents will appreciate hearing your thoughts on family." Family. If only she knew how fitting that was. The room fell silent as the PTA president introduced me. I walked up to the podium, my heart pounding in my chest. Rachel was seated near the front, her eyes sparkling with pride, completely unaware that the ground was about to fall out from under her. "Thank you for having me here tonight," I began, my voice steady but cold. "I've been asked to speak about family, and how important it is to all of us here. As parents, we want to set the best example for our children. We want them to know that trust, honesty, and loyalty are the foundations of a strong family." I paused, letting my words sink in. I could see Rachel watching me, still smiling. Matt was seated a few rows behind her, his relaxed posture a stark contrast to the tension building inside me. "But sometimes," I continued, "we learn that the people closest to us aren't always who we think they are. That trust can be broken in ways we never expected." The room was quiet, everyone listening intently. Though they had no idea where I was going, I could feel the weight of their attention on me, the anticipation building. And that's why tonight, I want to share something personal. Something that, as difficult as it is, needs to be said. Not just for me, but for everyone here. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the photos Tom had given me. I held them up, facing the crowd, my voice steady and measured. "This is what betrayal looks like." Gasps rippled through the room as I placed the photos on the projector screen for everyone to see. There, in glaring detail, were images of Rachel and Matt, their secret meetings, their intimate moments, all laid bare for the entire room to witness. Rachel's face drained of color as the photos came into focus. The smile vanished from her lips, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Matt sat frozen, his eyes wide, realizing that his life was about to implode. "Rachel," I said, turning to face her directly, "has been having an affair with our neighbor, Matt. For months now, they've been lying to me, to our family, and to everyone in this room." The silence was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire room had been stunned into disbelief. And then, slowly, the murmurs began. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging shocked glances. "These are the people we trust with our children. These are the people we invite into our homes," I continued, my voice now cold with anger. "And this is what they do behind closed doors. They betray us. They betray their own families." Rachel stood up suddenly, her face pale. "Kevin, please. We can talk about this at home," she stammered, her voice shaking. "No, Rachel," I snapped, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "We're done talking. This is the truth, and everyone here deserves to know it." Matt stood up as well, his face flushed with embarrassment. He looked around the room as if searching for a way out, but there was none. The walls were closing in on both of them, and there was no escape. "I've gathered all the evidence," I said, addressing the room again. "This is just the beginning. There's more, much more. And believe me, you'll all be seeing it soon." I stepped away from the podium, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd done it. I'd ripped their secret apart in the most public way possible. As I walked past Rachel, her eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. But I didn't stop. I didn't say another word. This was the beginning of their end. The aftermath of the PTA meeting was swift and brutal. By the time I left the school, my phone was already blowing up with calls and texts. Parents, neighbors, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, either in shock or disbelief. But I didn't respond. I wasn't looking for sympathy or explanations. I had done what I set out to do, and now I needed space to let it all sink in. At home, the silence was deafening. Rachel hadn't come back from the meeting yet, and I wasn't sure when she would. Madison was upstairs, probably asleep, blissfully unaware of the explosion I had just set off in our lives. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Rachel would normally be. The house felt different now, cold, hollow, like a reflection of the broken family it had become. When Rachel finally walked through the door, it was late. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse, not saying a word at first. I didn't get up. I just waited. "Kevin," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I leaned back in the chair, folding my arms across my chest. "There's nothing left to talk about." Tears filled her eyes, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. "Almost. What were you thinking?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that? In front of everyone?" I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and disgust. "Why would I do that? Are you serious, Rachel? You lied to me. You cheated on me. You threw away everything we had for what? For Matt?" I spat the last word out, his name feeling like poison on my tongue. She wiped her eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath. "I never meant for it to happen like this," she muttered. "It just got out of control." I stood up, finally losing my patience. "Got out of control? Rachel, this didn't just happen. You made a choice. You lied to me, to Madison, to everyone. And now, you want me to just sit here and listen to excuses?" She stepped closer, reaching for my arm, but I pulled away. "Kevin, please. I love you. I don't want to lose you." Those words were like a slap to the face. "Love? Do you have the nerve to stand there and talk about love? If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." For a moment, she was silent, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. "I don't know what I was thinking," she whispered. "I was confused. I felt lost." "Lost?" I scoffed, shaking my head. "You weren't lost, Rachel. You were selfish. You didn't think about what this would do to our family, to Madison." Her face crumpled, and she sank down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'll do anything to fix this. Please, Kevin, don't give up on us." I stood there, watching her cry, feeling the last remnants of my patience slip away. "It's too late, Rachel," I said coldly. "You already destroyed us." I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the couch. I didn't have the energy to comfort her, and I wasn't sure I ever would again. As I climbed the stairs to check on Madison, the weight of what I had just done settled over me like a heavy blanket. This was the end of my marriage. There was no going back. The next morning, the gossip had already spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People whispered behind closed doors, exchanging shocked glances whenever they saw me. I didn't care. In fact, I welcomed it. Let them talk. Let them know exactly who Rachel and Matt really were. Rachel had left early that morning, avoiding Madison and me. I had no idea where she went, and honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't interested in hearing more of her lies or apologies. What I did care about, though, was Matt. I wanted to see how long it would take him to run. It didn't take long. By noon, I noticed the moving trucks pulling up in front of Matt's house. He must have realized the situation was too hot to handle. Word had already spread through the PTA, and once the school got involved, it was only a matter of time before his life unraveled. I stood by the window, watching as movers loaded boxes into the truck. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors, most of them expressing disbelief at what had happened. One message caught my attention. Tom had texted me. "Looks like Matt's on the run." I smirked at the message. Good. He deserved to be humiliated, just like Rachel. I couldn't resist. I needed to see this up close. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, making sure to walk slowly, taking my time as I approached Matt's house. He was standing in the driveway, talking to one of the movers, his face pale and tense. When he saw me, he froze. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, locked in a silent stare off. I could see the fear in his eyes, the panic of a man who knew his life was crumbling around him. You think you're just gonna walk away from this? I finally asked, my voice low and steady. Matt swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. I'm leaving, Kevin. I don't want any more trouble. I took a step closer, narrowing my eyes. You already caused plenty of trouble. Did you think you could sleep with my wife and get away with it? You think moving away is going to fix this? He didn't answer. He just stood there, looking defeated, like a man who knew he'd already lost. Don't think for a second that running away makes you the bigger man, I said, my voice dripping with contempt. You're a coward, Matt. And everyone in this neighborhood knows it now. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. There was nothing he could say to justify what he'd done. Get out of here, I said, my voice cold. Before I do something I'll regret. He didn't need any more convincing. Without another word, Matt turned and headed back into his house, his steps quick and anxious. Within an hour, the moving truck was loaded and Matt was gone. Just like that, he disappeared, leaving behind the wreckage of his affair with Rachel. I stood in the driveway, watching the truck drive away, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't complete, not yet, but it was a start. Matt was gone, his life ruined, and soon Rachel's world would crumble just the same. This was only the beginning of their downfall. And I wasn't done yet. As I walked back to my house, I felt a cold, empty satisfaction settle in my chest. Revenge was a slow process, but it was worth every moment. Rachel had betrayed me, and Matt had stolen from me. Now, they were both paying the price. And I wasn't finished collecting. The morning after Matt's hasty departure, the house felt emptier and quieter. Rachel hadn't come home the previous night, and I wasn't surprised. She was avoiding me, probably trying to figure out her next move. But avoidance wasn't going to save her. We were far beyond that now. Madison was sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling in a notebook, oblivious to the turmoil unfolding around her. I forced a smile as I poured myself some coffee, but inside, the knot in my stomach was tightening. The events of the last few days were taking their toll on me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Rachel and I would have to face each other again. Around noon, the front door creaked open. Rachel walked in, looking haggard and drained. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. We locked eyes for a brief moment, and the tension between us was palpable. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. We need to talk, I said, my voice sharp and to the point. Rachel looked down, nodding slightly as she set her purse on the counter. I motioned for her to follow me into the living room, away from Madison's curious ears. Once we were seated, I didn't waste any time. So, Matt's gone, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. I guess he couldn't handle the fallout. Rachel flinched at the mention of his name. Kevin, I'm so sorry, she said quietly, her voice trembling. I never meant for any of this to happen. I made a mistake. A mistake? I scoffed. You didn't trip and fall into an affair, Rachel. You made a series of choices, over and over again, to lie, to cheat, to betray everything we built. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. But I love you, Kevin. I never stopped loving you. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. You have a funny way of showing love, Rachel. Sneaking around with Matt, lying to me and Madison, throwing away our life together. That's not love. She wiped her eyes, shaking her head. I was confused. I was lonely, and Matt was. He was there. It was stupid, and it was wrong, but I never wanted to hurt you. Lonely? I repeated, my anger rising again. If you were lonely, you could have come to me, Rachel. You could have told me how you were feeling. But instead, you chose him. Her lips quivered, and she looked down at her hands. I was weak. Yeah, you were, I snapped. And now, you're going to have to live with the consequences of that weakness. Rachel looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Is there any way we can fix this? I'll do whatever it takes, Kevin. Counseling, therapy, anything. Please, don't let this be the end. I stared at her, the woman I once loved, the mother of my child, and felt nothing but a cold emptiness. Rachel, I don't know if there's anything left to fix. You shattered the trust we had. You broke us. She sobbed quietly, burying her face in her hands. I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. The weight of her betrayal was too heavy, and my heart was too hardened by anger and pain. I need time, I said finally. I need space to figure out what I want. What's best for Madison? Rachel nodded through her tears. I understand, she whispered. I'll give you all the time you need. I stood up, unable to sit there and watch her fall apart any longer. We'll figure out how to tell Madison when the time is right. But for now, I want you to stay away. You can stay at your sister's or wherever, but I don't want you in this house. She looked devastated but didn't argue. She simply nodded and gathered her things. As she walked toward the door, she paused, turning back to face me. I love you, Kevin, she said softly. No matter what happens, I want you to know that. I didn't respond. I couldn't. As she walked out the door, I felt the final thread of our marriage snap, leaving behind only the wreckage of what once was. In the days following the PTA meeting, the atmosphere around town shifted dramatically. Wherever I went, people whispered. Parents who had once been friendly now exchanged awkward glances and sidelong looks whenever I passed by. Rachel, on the other hand, had become a ghost. She wasn't attending any school functions or neighborhood gatherings. Her absence was deafening. The fallout from the public exposure of her affair had completely isolated her from the community. Even those who didn't know the full story had heard enough to turn their backs on her. It was exactly what I had planned. Rachel losing her social standing, her network, everything she had held so dear. It was a harsh kind of justice, but that was the point. She had destroyed our family, and now she was paying the price in ways that went beyond our marriage. I was sitting in my office at work one afternoon, lost in thought, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from one of the parents I'd spoken to briefly at the PTA meeting. Coffee? There's something we need to talk about. Curious, I agreed to meet them at a local cafe. When I arrived, it wasn't just one parent, there were three. All of them were familiar faces from school events, and all of them looked tense. After some initial small talk, one of them, Lisa, spoke up. Kevin, we've heard about what happened with Rachel. And while we don't want to intrude on your personal life, there's something you should know. I raised an eyebrow, trying to read her expression. What is it? Lisa hesitated for a moment, exchanging glances with the others. There's been talk that Matt wasn't the only one. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? We don't have proof, Lisa said quickly, but there are rumors that Rachel was involved with other people in the neighborhood. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. One affair had been bad enough, but more? The thought twisted in my mind, a fresh wave of anger bubbling to the surface. Who? I asked, my voice tight with rage. Who are they saying she was with? Lisa shook her head. We don't know for sure. It's all whispers right now, but it's more than just Matt. People have noticed patterns. Late nights, unexplained absences, things like that. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. Could Rachel have betrayed me more than I already knew? The idea made my skin crawl. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage was unraveling, and the worst part was, I had no idea how deep the betrayal went. Kevin, we're not telling you this to hurt you, one of the other parents chimed in. We just thought you deserved to know what people were saying. We wanted to give you a heads up. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. Thanks for telling me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I appreciate it. As I left the cafe, my head was spinning. The possibility that Rachel's betrayal went beyond Matt gnawed at me, feeding my anger and frustration. I had thought I was done, that the worst was over, but now it seemed like there were still secrets left to uncover. The storm I had unleashed was far from over, and now I was beginning to wonder if I had truly prepared myself for what might come next. The conversation at the cafe kept replaying in my mind, growing louder with every passing day. Rachel's affair with Matt was just the tip of the iceberg. If the rumors were true, there were more lies waiting to be uncovered. More betrayals. I spent the next few days in a haze, thinking back to the moments when Rachel had been busy or out late. All those times she had smiled at me with that easy, practiced look, as if nothing in the world could shake our marriage. The mask had slipped with Matt, but I wasn't sure how many other masks she had been wearing. It didn't take long for me to make a decision. I called Jeff, the private investigator I had hired to dig up dirt on Matt and Rachel's affair. He had done a thorough job before, and now I needed him again. If there were more secrets, I needed to know. Every single one. When Jeff answered, I got straight to the point. I need you to keep digging, I said, my voice low. I've heard rumors that Rachel might have been involved with other people. Can you look into it? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I can do that, Jeff replied. I'll need a few more details. Any names, places, times? I racked my brain for anything that might help. I don't have specifics, I admitted. Just times when she wasn't home. Times when she said she was with friends or at work. Start there. Jeff agreed, and after we hung up, I felt the weight of what I had set into motion. I had already destroyed Rachel's affair with Matt, but now I was going deeper into the abyss. Part of me wondered if this was all too much, if it was better to leave the past where it lay. But the anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all demanded answers. Over the next few days, I buried myself in work, trying to distract myself from the storm brewing. Jeff sent me periodic updates, but nothing concrete, until one Friday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, tapping away at my keyboard when my phone buzzed. Jeff's message was short and to the point: "We need to meet." I found something. My heart raced as I texted him back to set up a meeting. A few hours later, we met at a diner on the outskirts of town. Jeff arrived with a manila folder, just like before, and slid it across the table to me. "Found more than just Matt," Jeff said, his tone professional but serious. "Rachel was seeing someone else. A neighbor, but not Matt. His name's Derek, he lives 2 streets over." I stared at the folder, my fingers itching to open it. "Derek?" I asked, trying to recall if I knew him. "What's his story?" Jeff leaned back in his seat. "He's married and has 2 kids. I dug around a bit, and it looks like Rachel and Derek were meeting up a few times a week. Mostly during the day when his wife wasn't home. This wasn't a one-time thing, it's been going on for months." Months. That word hit me hard. Matt was bad enough, but this was a whole other level of betrayal. Rachel hadn't just made a mistake, she had been living a double life, fooling me at every turn. I opened the folder and scanned the photos inside. There they were, Rachel and Derek, caught in intimate moments. In his car, at his house, in places that were supposed to be safe. Unassuming. My hands shook as I closed the folder, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. Why didn't I see this? I muttered under my breath. Jeff shook his head. She was good at hiding it. Some people are. I thanked him, paid for his coffee, and left the diner, the folder clutched tightly in my hand. As I drove home, the weight of Rachel's lies threatened to crush me. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with, had been playing me for a fool. And I couldn't help but wonder, what else had she been hiding? It didn't take long for the anger to take over. I wasn't just going to sit around and let this fester. Rachel had lied to me and cheated on me, not just once, but multiple times. And now Derek was part of the equation. I needed answers. I needed to confront him. The next evening, I found myself driving 2 streets over, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to do. Derek's house was unassuming, just like any other in the neighborhood. But as I pulled up, it felt like a monument to betrayal. I parked a few houses away and walked the rest of the distance, my footsteps heavy with purpose. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. After a moment, the door opened, and there he was, Derek. He looked surprised to see me, but not alarmed. "Not yet, Kevin?" he asked, glancing around as if he expected me to be there with some friendly purpose. "What's up, man?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold. "About Rachel." Derek's face went pale. He opened the door wider, motioning for me to come inside, but I shook my head. "We can talk out here," I said firmly. He swallowed, clearly nervous now. "Look, Kevin, I can explain." I cut him off. "Explain? Do you think there's an explanation that's going to make this better? You've been sneaking around with my wife behind my back. You think there's anything you can say that's going to change that?" Derek's eyes darted around, panic setting in. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "It was a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far." I let out a bitter laugh. "A mistake? It wasn't a mistake, Derek. You knew exactly what you were doing. You made a choice every single time." He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. "I trusted you," I said, my voice rising. "We live in the same neighborhood, our kids go to the same school, and you repaid that trust by stabbing me in the back." Derek looked down, shame written all over his face. "I'm sorry, Kevin. I really am. I never wanted to hurt you." Too late for that," I said, my fists clenched. "You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed everything. My family, my marriage, my life." He didn't say anything, just stood there, guilt radiating off of him. I could see the weight of his actions sinking in, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I hope it was worth it, I said finally, my voice low and dangerous. Because this isn't over. You're going to feel the consequences of what you've done. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Derek standing there, his face a mask of regret. But regret wasn't going to fix this. Nothing could. As I drove home, I knew I wasn't done. Rachel had made her choices, and so had Derek. But now it was my turn to decide how this all ended. I had exposed Matt, and I was ready to do the same to Derek if it came to that. The question wasn't whether I would fight back, it was how far I was willing to go. The confrontation with Derek left me feeling hollow. The anger, the sense of betrayal, it was all still there. But it no longer burned as hot. Derek's shame, his panicked apologies, they were expected. It was Rachel who had to answer for this. But I couldn't just let her see the full extent of my plan yet. No, I needed to be smarter. A few nights after confronting Derek, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop. I had all the evidence I needed now, photos of Rachel and Matt, photos of Rachel and Derek, and even the conversations I had recorded with the help of Jeff, the private investigator. It was all there, neatly organized in folders, waiting for me to decide how to use it. The PTA meeting at our daughter's school was coming up in a few days, and I knew that was the moment I would reveal everything. Rachel had no idea what was coming. She thought she had gotten away with her affair with Matt, and Derek had been just another secret she believed would stay hidden. But now it was time for the truth. The PTA meeting was an ideal stage for the reveal. It wasn't just about exposing Rachel's infidelity. It was about destroying the facade she had built for herself in this community. She had been pretending to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and the perfect neighbor. But that illusion was about to shatter. I spent the next few days carefully preparing everything. I went over the details, making sure that when the moment came, there would be no doubt, no ambiguity. I wanted to make sure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. I printed out photos, emails, and text messages. I gathered witness statements from Jeff's investigation, all of them showing a clear pattern of deceit. I was going to make sure that Rachel's betrayal wasn't just a private matter between us, it was going to be public. But as I prepared, a part of me still wondered if this was the right thing to do. Was I really going to drag Rachel's name through the mud in front of our neighbors, our friends, and even the parents of our daughter's classmates? There was no going back once I hit that point of no return. Then I thought about all the lies, all the nights Rachel had spent with Matt and Derek while I was home with our daughter. Thinking our marriage was solid. No, she had made her choices. And now it was time for her to face the consequences. The day of the PTA meeting arrived quicker than I expected. I dressed in my usual casual clothes, trying to act like everything was normal, like I hadn't spent the past few weeks planning the collapse of Rachel's world. As we got ready to leave for the meeting, Rachel was all smiles, chatting about our daughter's school projects, her upcoming birthday party, and everything else that had nothing to do with the storm that was about to hit. It was eerie, knowing what I knew, and seeing her act as if everything was fine. As if she hadn't been sneaking around with our neighbor and cheating on me with a man she had lied to our daughter about. I could barely look at her without feeling a surge of anger. When we arrived at the school, the auditorium was buzzing with parents and teachers, everyone exchanging polite smiles and small talk. The perfect suburban life. I scanned the room, spotting Matt sitting near the front with his wife. Derek wasn't there. Maybe he knew better than to show his face. Rachel didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, as she waved to friends and settled in beside me, her attention on the agenda for the evening. But my focus was elsewhere. I was watching the clock, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal everything. The meeting went on as usual, updates on school projects, budget concerns, and the upcoming school play. I nodded along, feigning interest, but my mind was racing. When the moment came to open the floor to comments or questions from the audience, I raised my hand. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my voice was steady as I stood up. I'd like to bring up a matter of concern, I said, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. Rachel shifted beside me, glancing up at me in surprise. As many of you know, we're all part of a close community here, I began, my voice carrying over the room. We trust each other, our kids play together, and we support one another. But sometimes, that trust gets broken. I glanced around the room, watching as a few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Matt's wife gave me a confused look, while Rachel's smile had frozen on her face. For the past few months, I've been investigating some personal matters, I continued, reaching into my bag. And I've come across some disturbing information involving my wife, Rachel. Rachel's eyes widened, her face turning pale as she realized where this was going. She whispered my name, but I ignored her. I have here evidence that my wife has been carrying on an affair, I said, pulling out the folder and holding it up for everyone to see. The room went silent, not just with Matt, but with another neighbor, Derek. Gasps rippled through the audience. Matt's face turned beet red, his wife's jaw dropped. And I could see the shock on people's faces as they realized what I was saying. Rachel grabbed my arm, her voice shaking. "Kevin, stop," she whispered urgently. "This isn't the place." But I wasn't stopping. Not now. I opened the folder, laying out photos, messages, and everything I had uncovered, making sure the truth was undeniable. This affair wasn't just a one-time thing, I continued. It's been going on for months, behind my back, and behind all of yours. Rachel has betrayed me. And by extension, she's betrayed this entire community. The room was in chaos now, parents whispering to one another, Matt's wife glaring at him, and Rachel staring at me in horror, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. I stepped back, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. My heart was still racing, but I felt a strange calmness now. The truth was out there, and there was no taking it back. Rachel stood up, her face pale, her voice shaking as she tried to speak. This isn't what it looks like. I made mistakes, but... No, Rachel, I interrupted, my voice cold. You made choices. And now you're facing the consequences. With that, I turned and walked out of the auditorium, leaving the destruction in my wake. Rachel was left to deal with the fallout. Matt was left to explain himself to his wife, and the rest of the community now knew the truth. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange sense of relief. The pain was still there, the betrayal still cut deep, but at least now. The lies were over. And Rachel? Well, she was left to pick up the pieces of the life she had destroyed. The drive home was silent. I didn't rush, but I didn't drag my feet either. I was calm, the weight of what I had just done settling in slowly. The truth was out, and I had followed through on my plan. But as I pulled into our driveway, reality hit me like a tidal wave. Our house, the one that once felt like a home, was now the epicenter of destruction. I turned off the engine and sat in the car for a moment. Staring blankly at the front door, I knew Rachel wasn't far behind me. She would come home, try to explain, try to fix what couldn't be fixed. But this wasn't just between us anymore. Our entire community now knew the truth about her affair, and there was no escaping the consequences. When I finally stepped inside, the silence was deafening. The house felt emptier than it ever had. I went straight to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. I wasn't sure what I was feeling, anger, relief, or just plain exhaustion. Minutes later, I heard the door open behind me. Rachel walked in, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She stood there for a moment, as if unsure how to approach me. She must have known there was no fixing this, but she still tried. "Kevin," her voice was barely a whisper. I don't even know where to begin. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the glass in my hand. "There's nothing left to say, Rachel. I said everything I needed to at the meeting." She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you, but you didn't have to humiliate me like that, Kevin. Not in front of everyone." I finally turned to face her, my eyes cold. "Humiliate you? You've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around with Matt and God knows who else. Do you really think you deserve sympathy right now?" She flinched at my words but stood her ground. "I made mistakes, yes, but we have a family. Our daughter. She's going to be affected by this. The way you exposed everything tonight, it's going to haunt her too. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt her." Hearing her mention our daughter stung. I knew there would be fallout for her too, but I couldn't let that excuse Rachel's behavior. She had put us in this situation. She had brought this on herself. "We'll deal with our daughter," I said, my voice firm. "But this marriage? It's over. You don't get to play the victim here, Rachel. You destroyed what we had. And now you're dealing with the consequences." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel the sympathy I once would have. She had broken my trust and shattered the life we built together. There was no going back now. Rachel collapsed onto one of the kitchen chairs, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "I don't know how to fix this. I didn't respond. I had already made my decision, and it was clear she had no answers either. We stood there in silence, the weight of the end of our marriage sinking in. In the days that followed, the ripple effect of what I'd done at the PTA meeting spread through our community like wildfire. People whispered in grocery stores, at school pickup, in the hallways. The details of Rachel's affair with Matt and her involvement with Derek were all anyone could talk about. It wasn't just the scandal, it was the public spectacle of how it had all come to light. Matt moved out of his house the next weekend. I saw the moving truck in the early hours of Saturday morning. His wife, shattered by the revelation, had filed for divorce, and he was packing up his life as quickly as possible. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction seeing him slink away in the shadows. But it didn't erase the anger I still felt toward Rachel. As for Rachel, she withdrew into herself. She stopped attending community events, avoiding the people who once considered her a friend. The phone calls and texts from her usual circle of moms and neighbors dried up, replaced with awkward silences and sidelong glances whenever we crossed paths with anyone from school or the neighborhood. She had become a pariah. At home, we barely spoke. Our conversations were strictly logistical, about our daughter's school schedule, who would take her to her activities, and how we would handle her inevitable questions. We hadn't told her everything yet, but she was smart. She knew something was wrong, and that was the hardest part. Watching her lose the innocence of believing her parents were perfect. Then came the knock on my office door one evening. It was Rachel, her face pale, her eyes filled with a strange mix of fear and desperation. "Kevin, I got a letter from the school today." I looked up, frowning. "What do you mean?" "They're asking if I'll continue being part of the PTA board." She paused, her voice trembling. "But they made it clear. Some parents have complained. They want me to step down." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And what did you expect? After what happened?" "I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered, her hands shaking. I thought they would understand that it was personal. Between us. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You brought this into the public, Rachel, the second you started sleeping with Matt. The community sees this as a reflection of your character. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed the trust of everyone around you." Her eyes filled with tears again, but I didn't care anymore. The truth was out. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The woman who had once been the social butterfly of the neighborhood, the one everyone admired, was now shunned. For once, I didn't feel guilty. "I'll step down," she said quietly. "I'll do it, but I never thought I'd lose everything like this." "You didn't just lose it," I said softly, "you threw it away." As I watched her walk away, shoulders slumped, the reality of our broken lives settled in deeper. We were no longer the couple everyone admired, no longer the happy family. We were now the cautionary tale whispered about behind closed doors. And I wasn't sure if I felt victorious or hollow. Weeks passed after Rachel stepped down from the PTA. The whispers began to die down, but the damage was permanent. She still avoided social gatherings, stopped making eye contact with neighbors, and rarely left the house unless it was necessary. We were coexisting now, like two strangers under the same roof. Our daughter, Emma, seemed to sense the tension. She would glance between us at the dinner table, her innocent questions about school or her friends hanging in the air like a heavy fog. I knew she was waiting for answers I hadn't fully figured out how to give her yet. One evening, Rachel came into the living room after Emma had gone to bed. I was sitting on the couch, the TV on, though I wasn't really watching it. She stood there for a moment, hesitant, before she finally spoke. "Kevin, I think it's time we talked about what happens next." I looked at her, the exhaustion clear in her eyes. She had lost weight, and her skin was paler than before. The woman who had once seemed invincible, who had captivated our neighbors and thrown her life into a whirlwind of deception, now stood before me, broken. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already had a feeling where this conversation was heading. "We can't keep living like this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence, the resentment, it's not good for any of us. Especially not for Emma. I nodded slowly. "I know." Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I think we should separate. I don't want to keep dragging this out. Kevin, I don't want to keep pretending that we can fix what's already broken." Her words didn't come as a surprise. I had been expecting them for a while now, but hearing them out loud still stung. We had reached the inevitable end, the point of no return. And though part of me had been waiting for this, there was still a heaviness that came with it. I agree, I finally said, my voice steady. We can't go back to the way things were. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry, Kevin, for everything. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if her apology was enough, or if it even mattered anymore. We had passed the point where sorry could fix anything. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it's the right decision for both of us. We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of the last few months pressing down on us. There were no more accusations, no more anger, just the quiet acceptance of what was coming. Emma deserves better than this, Rachel whispered. She deserves parents who aren't at each other's throats, who aren't living in a house full of lies. I nodded. She'll be our priority, no matter what happens between us. We spent the next few days working out the logistics. Rachel would move out first, staying with her sister until we figured out a more permanent arrangement. We would share custody of Emma, making sure she felt loved and supported through the transition. The house, the finances, all of it seemed secondary compared to making sure our daughter didn't bear the brunt of our broken marriage. The day Rachel left was strange. We didn't have a big argument, no dramatic goodbye. She packed a few bags, hugged Emma tightly, and walked out the door. Emma didn't fully understand what was happening yet, but I knew we'd have to explain it to her soon. As Rachel's car pulled away from the driveway, I stood by the window, watching her disappear down the street. A part of me still felt the sting of betrayal, but another part of me felt relief. The weight I had been carrying for months was starting to lift. I turned away from the window and walked back to the living room where Emma was sitting on the couch, coloring. She looked up at me, her big eyes filled with confusion. Dad, where's Mom going? I knelt down beside her, brushing a hand over her hair. Mom's going to stay with Aunt Claire for a little while, sweetheart. But we're both still here for you. Okay? That's never going to change. She nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I sat down beside her, pulling her into my arms, and for the first time in what felt like months, I allowed myself to relax. Rachel was gone, and with her departure came the end of the life we had built together, the life we had destroyed together. There was no dramatic closure, no grand redemption. Just the quiet end of a marriage that had once meant everything. I looked down at Emma, who was now focused on her coloring again. Her world still mostly intact. She didn't know the full extent of what had happened yet, and maybe she never would. But for now, she was safe. She was loved, and in the end, that was all that really mattered.